Welcome to another edition of the News Roundup. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's happening right now. Republican lawmakers in Minnesota are now calling for Governor Tim Walz to be impeached, claiming that he's in the process of starting a civil war with the federal government. A growing number of appalled critics denounced Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, accusing the far-left Democrat of actively inciting violence in Minneapolis. And President Trump threatens Minnesota with a day of reckoning and retribution after state officials sue the federal government over their ongoing ICE raids. Also, the death toll rising dramatically as growing demonstrations continue to rock Iran. The president now promising the protesters that U.S. help is on the way. And you won't believe your ears when you hear who's just become the highest grossing actor of all time. All this and a bunch more coming up right now on the Big Roundup. We have a great deal to get to today, and we begin with this. State lawmakers in Minnesota have apparently had it up to their ears with the destructive and ruinous policies of Governor Tim Walz, and they're now talking about fast-tracking the process for his actual impeachment. Yeah, folks have been saying that for a long time. Get this done and over with. According to one state representative, a guy called Mike Weiner, the governor is currently treading on very thin ice because he's on the verge of starting an actual civil war with our own federal government. He goes on to warn that at this very moment, Walz is right on the edge of sedition if he hasn't already crossed the line. As a result, the lawmaker says that both he and his equally frustrated colleagues are now laser focused on removing the governor from office as soon as possible before he can do any more damage and before even more people get hurt. Furthermore, the state rep points out that following last week's tragic ICE shooting, Walz played his cards and showed his true intentions by virtually admitting that Minnesota was now at war with the Trump administration. He claims that instead of following the rule of law and presuming innocence regarding the deadly shooting, the governor instead opted to play politics, rally alongside his fellow Democrats, and basically instigate more potential violence by calling for additional protests. The lawmaker says that by both opposing the federal government's legitimate immigration efforts and allowing billions of tax dollars to slip through his fingers, Walz is actually a dual threat to his state's welfare. At the very least, both he and his colleagues are urging the governor to step down immediately and save them all the hassle of going through a lengthy impeachment process. In the meantime, the Department of Homeland Security is taking it a step further and demanding that Walz and his Democratic cronies honor federal detainers concerning more than 1,300 criminal illegal aliens who are currently being held in custody in Minnesota jails. They claim that rather than work with the U.S. government at all, Walz and his pals are instead releasing hundreds of criminal illegals back out onto the streets, thus threatening everyone who lives there. Now, for his part, Walz flat out denies those specific accusations, calling them categorically false and saying that his administration honors all federal detainers, including those from ICE. Final thoughts, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Now, here's the deal. In certain circles, it might be considered impolite or perhaps even mildly inflammatory to suggest that on some level, Governor Tim Walz is a feckless leader, corrupt, incompetent, and not acting in the best interest of the state of Minnesota. So you know, the News Roundup, we're not one of those circles. Therefore, we declare that Governor Tim Walz is a feckless leader, corrupt, incompetent, and not acting in the best interest of the state of Minnesota. Pretty basic. Actually, we've been saying that all along, and thousands of our fellow Rounduppers, they've left comments for us right here, essentially saying the exact same thing. Now, the way we see it, Mr. Walz has already admitted that he's the wrong guy for the job by saying he won't be running for a third failed term as Minnesota's governor in the next election, which, by the way, is coming up in November. Next, this train wreck of a state leader should do the right thing right now and simply resign. But because he won't, then Minnesota's last remaining grown-up in the room, that guy, Congressman Mike Weiner, he has the only solution: impeach Tim Walz. Also, before advancing Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan to the post, track down a phone book, one of those big, giant phone books, and with a blindfold on, pick any name at random from that book and give that person the job. At this point, anybody, virtually anybody, could run the state better than Tim Walz or his second in command, the one they call Madam Flanagan. I will stick with a related topic now and turn our attention to the growing backlash against another Minnesota Democrat who's accused of stoking the flames of violence and pouring gasoline on the fire by encouraging protesters to actually target federal immigration agents. Following a number of recent inflammatory and incendiary comments, critics are now pointing the finger directly at Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and blaming her for ratcheting up the rhetoric, inciting insurrection, also urging people with a vengeance to take out their growing frustration on law enforcement. In particular, they point to several recent videos of Omar during which she makes a number of provocative and highly aggressive comments concerning ICE as well as the federal government's immigration efforts in Minneapolis. For example, in one cable TV interview shot in the middle of Minneapolis protests, the Somali-born congresswoman actually accuses ICE of committing blatant murder. Yeah, we'll talk more about that in just a bit. Meanwhile, another video shows Omar riding in the back of a pickup truck while leading hordes of protesters through the streets like the Pied Piper, and all while encouraging them to, quote, make sure that these people pay for what they've done to us. Now, it's not abundantly clear what and who those people are, who they actually are, and what exactly she would have her followers do to them. However, from the back of the truck, Omar also brags to her marchers that, quote, we're going to show them all out the door, and that together they're all somehow committed to what she calls an active resistance against the Trump administration. One conservative activist says that during her recent protests, Omar also referred to federal agents as terrorists and that enough is enough. Also argues that she's now clearly inciting violence against ICE, that she lied on her immigration papers as well. We've heard that a few times. And that at the very least, she should be tossed out of Congress. Additionally, Omar is catching a bit of flack for a few remarks she recently made when visiting a federal ICE facility. At the time, she claimed without proof that both ICE and the Trump administration, they're disappearing people into the darkness. No, they're not. And officials are responding by accusing the congresswoman of lying through her teeth, spewing repugnant bile, and demonizing federal agents. In the meantime, in a related note, which Omar is certainly aware of by now, the Trump administration says they are ending special temporary protection status for migrants from Somalia. The move impacts thousands of Somalis who are currently living in the U.S., including hundreds in Omar's backyard of Minnesota, who will now be forced to leave the country in the next couple of months. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Now, here's the bottom line. Ilhan Omar is a clear and present danger. Her words and actions are reprehensible, in my estimation, actionable as well, and clearly she thrives on conflict, chaos, and community division. You heard her say that we're going to make people pay for what they did to us. That's her quote. She accuses the Trump administration and ICE officials of disappearing people. And there's this. She has repeatedly accused ICE officials, federal agents, of murder. I guess when you're a Congress gal, you don't need charges, trials, and verdicts. She's one heck of a shot caller, knows all too well how to cut to the chase and eliminate due process and all that other goofy, legal, red tape nonsense. That's for the little people. Hey, in the interest of being fair, though, I will say this in defense of the 5th District's fair maiden. If I were an elected official in a state which is being investigated for $9 billion worth of fraud, I might do precisely what she's doing. Change the narrative, vilify the president, condemn federal agents, and do that all while playing the role of the innocent victim. Yeah, it's fine strategy. It's working out pretty well for her. And as an extra added bonus, the past couple of days, nobody's been talking about that reported $30 million in her bank account. For the most part, that part of the story has been all but forgotten. In fact, maybe I shouldn't have said anything. Now I sort of kind of feel bad. I'll pivot now just a bit and shift our focus to President Trump's response to all the shenanigans which are currently taking place in that land of 10,000 lakes. In a message aimed at reassuring nervous Minnesotans, 47 defends his administration's immigration policies and tells people they should no longer be afraid about what's going on because, in his words, a day of reckoning and retribution is soon coming. Trump goes on to blame former President Joe Biden's horrible open borders policy for allowing thousands of dangerous and violent criminals and insane people to invade our country, adding that all ICE wants to do is send them back to the prisons where they all came from. Additionally, he brags that everywhere his administration sends federal forces, thousands of criminals are quickly removed and crime soon goes down. Furthermore, the president blames Minnesota's Democrats for making things much worse than they have to be. He claims the Dems actually love all the unrest, I do too, which is being caused by professional agitators and anarchists because it takes the spotlight away from the billions in taxpayer cash that was stolen from state coffers. In the meantime, authorities in both Minnesota and Illinois are now suing the Trump administration in order to block them from surging ICE agents to their states. They argue the move violates the Constitution's 10th Amendment, which preserves certain rights for individual states. Now, for their part, the Trump administration says that hundreds of additional officers are already on the way to Minnesota to help out the nearly 2,000 ICE agents and border officers who are already there, already in place. Final thought, this is the News Roundup Lowdown. This all sounds like the Trump administration is going to jump into high gear with some kind of a grand scheme to fix Minnesota. Sounds like he wants to track down the illegal immigrants, take them into custody, and where appropriate and when appropriate, deport them out of the U.S. Sounds like he has a plan to track down the billions in reported fraud and hold a number of individuals and groups responsible and, in time, restore the state of Minnesota to a source of national pride. In fact, Editor Pranov the Magnificent, stand by, sir. It almost sounds like 47 has a big plan to check it out, make Minnesota great again, which is something we talked about on this program yesterday, right here. Bottom line, I appreciate what Team Trump is trying to do, but it'll never work. And I say it's 100% impossible. On the other hand, he did negotiate peace between Israel and Hamas. He also secured a historic agreement for NATO members to raise defense spending to 5% of GDP, a foreign policy feat long thought impossible. He also obliterated Iran's nuclear program. He fixed the border as well. And I think he did all those things before supper was even served. Therefore, now that I think about it, fixing Minnesota, it's kind of a no-brainer. And watching Omar and her buddy Tim Walz doing that perp walk, that would be icing on the cake for tens of millions of flag-saluting Americans, just like you and I. And on that note, Pranov, can we have a shot of Old Glory, please? A nice, beautiful picture of the red, white, and blue. And thank you once again, Mr. President, for everything you're doing. Thank you in advance. Change subjects completely now and take a closer look at a former U.S. military member who's just received a lengthy prison sentence for spying on behalf of Communist China. Serious stuff here. A federal judge in San Diego has just sentenced a former Navy sailor to more than 16 years in prison after he was convicted for selling dozens of critical technical manuals to a Chinese intelligence officer. Now, according to prosecutors, the convict worked as an engineer on an amphibious assault ship when he was recruited by a spy from China. He then sent detailed photos and videos of that vessel to his contact, as well as vital information concerning American weapon systems and the locations of other Navy ships. There you have it, a fine, great American. It's embarrassing. In return, the sailor received the paltry sum of $12,000, and eventually the long arm of the law, caught up to him. Last year, a federal jury, they kind of convicted him on 6 separate charges, including espionage. U.S. officials now say the entire affair is further proof of the growing threat posed by the Chinese communist regime and their intelligence operatives. Say right now, China, they're doing all they can to undermine our freedom by stealing sensitive government information, hacking into our infrastructure, no surprise, and preparing to sabotage our society at every available turn. Now, a couple of additional headlines we are keeping a very close watch on here in the News Roundup newsroom. And first up, President Trump currently weighing his options as the political situation in Iran now reaching a boiling point. Thousands of protesters are reportedly dead due to the Islamic regime's brutal crackdown against pro-democracy demonstrations. Streets are said to be in utter chaos. Even Senator Lindsey Graham is now actually urging the president to assassinate Iran's supreme leader. In the meantime, 47 is promising the Iranian people that help is on the way and that the regime is going to pay a very steep price for what they're doing. And we encourage you to stay tuned. We're on top of that story. A little closer to home, the president now warning that our entire nation could be completely screwed, his words, if the Supreme Court ultimately rules against his tariff policy. Says before it's all said and done, the cost to repair the damage would add up to trillions of dollars that our country simply can't afford, and that in the end would all wind up in the middle of a complete mess. All right, now a quick gander at a bit of showbiz news, and we kick things off today with a surprising performer who's just become the highest grossing actor of all time. Believe it or not, the movies of 47-year-old Academy Award winner Zoe Saldana have now made more combined money than the films of any other actor on the planet. Go figure. She shows it all to her agent for booking her major roles in such classic franchises as Avatar, also Marvel, Star Trek, and more. You know that this Zoe Saldana person has become the highest grossing actor of all time is, by all accounts, meaningful, but it's also mildly questionable. And I can say that because I'm a bit of a numbers guy. I always just kind of assumed that movie star Pauly Shore was the highest grossing actor of all time. Therefore, before I sign off on this, I'll need to see some certifiable proof before I call it 100% authentic. Pauly Shore, I know you're monitoring this program, and I've got your back. Hey, speaking of actors, another popular Hollywood performer is drawing boatloads of attention, not for his latest role, however, but instead for his remarkable physical transformation. Check this guy out. 73 years young, John Goodman has dropped more than 200 pounds since he began getting serious about his health a couple of decades ago. And the former Roseanne star, he's also starred in the Flintstones movies, says he owes it all to giving up booze, sticking to a fresh diet, and walking over 10,000 steps a day, one step at a time. Hey, look, we live in a world of superheroes. You got Batman, Superman, your News Roundup host, me, Bill Thomas, also Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, and more. Today, we add one more name to that fine list, and that's TV and movie star John Goodman. Anybody who can lose 200 pounds and live a happy, healthy life is a rock star superhero in my book, and he looks like $1 million. Also on the music front, nearly half a century after his death, the one and only Elvis Presley, the King, is about to release another album. How'd that happen? The recording is the companion soundtrack for a new documentary called Epic, E-P-I-C, which stands for Elvis Presley in Concert. And it features a smorgasbord of digitally enhanced hits performed as part of the King's legendary Las Vegas residency, the Golden Years. You know, for years and years, they kept telling us that Elvis has left the building. And he sort of kind of has, as you know. I think he died back in about 1977, give or take. But now he is back with us, and the new documentary sounds brilliant. Can't wait for the new movie, the CD, the MP3, and the 2 LP vinyl release. I think in the old days, they called that a double album. And music always sounds better when you hear it on a record player. Also, if you're a member of the younger set in his day, Elvis was even bigger then than Taylor Swift is right now. And by the way, leave us a comment with your favorite Elvis song, or maybe your favorite Taylor Swift song. And now it is time for us to call it a wrap on the Big News Roundups. Have an awesome day today. Stay safe. And if you haven't done so already, it's pretty basic. Just hit that subscribe button right there. With that, we're going to dim the lights, gently fade to black, and we'll see you right back here next time for another episode of the Big News Roundup.